Hello and welcome. My name is Jeff Dalrymple, Executive Director for Evangelical Council for Abuse Prevention. We're a national association of Christian ministries dedicated to child and youth protection. We do that primarily through our established child safety standards, which are a set of principles and indicators that apply to any child and youth serving Christian ministry in the U.S. and all 5 U.S. territories. So we hope that you'll visit our website, ecap.net, to learn more about our ministry. Our child safety standards are freely available online. And today we have our most recent episode of Meet the Experts. And today is our good friend, Jake Lapp from Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability. I think moving forward, Jake, we'll just use acronyms. So ECAP and ECFA for our friends listening in. But thank you so much for being on Meet the Experts today.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. It's great to be here.
ECFA has been just a great encouragement and resource and a champion for our cause as we work to create safe places for kids to hear the gospel and to grow in discipleship. Honestly, ECFA was the inspiration for our ministry 6 years ago, coming out of just in response to the Houston Chronicle and the Abuse of Faith 6-part series, had us asking the question, how do we foster trust in Christian ministries? And certainly we thought of our friends at ECFA. Previous leadership at the time, Dan Busby, John Van Drunen, were critical in making some key connections to help us get off the ground. And of course, you and Michael Martin, your current president, have been dear friends to us as we have launched and are growing in membership and impact. So thanks for being with us today.
Absolutely.
What we're hoping to do is talk more about the work of ECFA, your role in particular, and even just the importance of fostering trust in Christian ministries. Michael Martin was recently on a webinar that we did talking about the new leadership standard, and so we'll briefly touch on that. But Jake, tell us, let's start by just telling us about yourself, your background, what led you to ECFA, and then just jump in there and talk to us about your role at ECFA today.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. It's an honor to be here with you all today, and yeah, I've been involved with ECAP over the past couple of years and kind of watching guys grow and having conversations. It's really been a joy. My role here at ECFA is my official title is Vice President and Member Accountability. That's just a fancy title to say I work with members, just like most of our team does here at ECFA. But I have the opportunity to lead our team of CPAs with our senior vice president, Stacy Brown, who, Jeff, I know you know really well in your hometown of Jacksonville down there. So I lead that team through ECFA's different accountability processes and how we work with members. I've been at ECFA for about 5.5 years. So I think March of 19 is when my family and I moved here to Winchester, Virginia. I'm married. I have wife Diane. I have 3 kids, 2 teenage boys and a 9-month-old daughter. So it's a fun adventure for us. And came out of most of my career. I graduated college in 2006, has been in Christian ministry through public accounting for a period of time, and then also denominational leadership as controller and also as chief information officer. So really just love working with churches and ministries. Came to ECFA really just out of that desire to serve and to serve well. And of course, being in the Christian community, I've known of ECFA since I graduated from college and known a lot of different staff and seen them many times at conferences. So whenever I learned about a position available in 2000, I guess it was late 2018, I was excited to just have the opportunity to connect with the staff and walk through the interview process. And so here I am 5.5 years later.
Well, praise God. We both have similar stories of how the Lord's, led us through a professional career and ministry calling and all the rest. You and I both, I think, work in and around a lot of Christian ministry and work with a lot of pastors. And I think of myself while I'm an elder at my EFCA church here in Jacksonville, Atlantic Beach, more precisely, where Interstate 10 kind of ends on the East Coast. But we work with pastors and ministry leaders all the time. While I don't consider myself a vocational pastor, I certainly seek to be elder qualified, and I believe that's really, really important to be a part in leadership of our ministry. I'm sure you feel the same way, but praise God for your 3 kids and your wife, Diane, and just how the Lord's led you to ECFA.
Yeah.
Um, can you talk a little bit? So let's just assume that some of our viewers today don't know what ECFA does. Could you give us a high altitude view?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you already said our name, right? Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability, not to be confused with EFCA, the Evangelical Free Church. We get that a lot. So, and a lot of people call us ECFA. So we have all sorts of names that we go by, but ECFA really, some history. ECFA was founded in the late 70s, at a time where President Jimmy Carter really described America as having a crisis of confidence. And Senator Mark Hatfield at the time engaged with leaders from World Vision and Billy Graham Evangelistic Association with this idea of saying you guys really need to find a way to self-regulate in order to keep from facing potential government intervention, just because of a lot of different things that was happening around fundraising and use of resources. And so as a result of that engagement meeting, from how I understand it, on a very cold, snowy day in Chicago, ECFA was born with 150 charter members. And so our roots go back 45 years this year, I believe, from the starting of ECFA. If I remember right, I think I started in 2019 and we were celebrating our 40th anniversary. So if I'm celebrating 5 years, it means ECFA is at 45 years. And this whole idea of 150 organizations came together to form ECFA. We consider them our charter members. This idea of saying we're going to adopt standards and we're going to hold ourselves accountable to them. And so over the last 45 years, ECFA has grown, has went through a lot of different seasons. This year, we're right around 2,700 members, accredited ECFA members, both ministries and churches. I think one of the unique things with ECFA is we accredit organizations, large organizations. I mean, World Vision, Salvation Army, some very large organizations, but we also work closely with small organizations as well. So we kind of have a threshold of $50,000, which we feel is a good starting point for organizations. But we work with most of our members are in that like less than 5 million range. That's just kind of the typical Christian ministry, but so it's really a joy to you work with. We're able to learn and get resources and provide from big ministries to small ministries and really create a network that works well together.
Well, praise God for that snowy day in 1979. When you mention Jimmy Carter, I immediately think of those late 70s, because I think it's by like 1980, right, that President Reagan is in the Oval Office. And so, yeah, 1979 was a busy year for a number of things, but praise God for the ministry and 45 years of faithfulness for ECFA. Yeah, I have to do that all the time because I'm a part of the EFCA. I have to differentiate from ECFA all the time.
Yes.
In the Evangelical Free Church of America, they just call it the Free Church. But I'll be careful with my acronyms here. This is all being recorded. Jake, talk to us, just double click on standards for ECFA and accreditation. Think someone has no idea. Maybe they think of higher education when they think of accreditation. What is that? Why is that important?
Yeah. Well, I mean, higher education really is the most commonly accredited institutions. I mean, of course, we look at that as a way, if you're going to a school as a college student, you want to go to an accredited school because that diploma usually means something a little more than if it's not accredited and all of those pieces. Accreditation at ECFA is very similar. It's not a required accreditation, though. I think it's important to share that from organizations come to ECFA and voluntarily join and enter into that accreditation process. And accreditation for us really is the opportunity to partner in accountability. Accreditation is a relationship. So, I've not worked in the higher education accreditation area. So I don't know all the details there, but I think we're unique in the sense that we really think that accountability thrives in a relationship with our members. So it doesn't mean that we're on the phone with every member every month or even every year. I mean, that's a lot of members, but our desire is to partner deep with ministries and we do that through our 7 standards. So ECFA, just share it a little bit if you don't know about ECFA standards. We have the 7 standards of responsible stewardship. Those standards, our name is financial accountability, but those standards go much beyond just financial. Our whole goal at ECFA, our mission is to enhance trust in Christ-centered churches and ministries. And we do that through our standards. So just quickly walk through. Standard 1 is statement of faith. So we do require organizations to have an evangelical statement of faith or otherwise demonstrate a commitment to the evangelical statement of faith. The next standard we have is standard 2 is governance. Really, governance I consider almost like a bedrock standard. The standards thrive in effective governance. So some simple things that I say simple. We always say the standards are simple, but they're not simplistic. A lot of thought has went in there. The standards don't change very often. There's not a lot of things that happen with the standards. So the fact that you mentioned Michael and the leadership standard, that's a big deal. But governance requires organizations to have at least 5 board members who are majority independent. So we do get the question a lot of time, like, can the CEO serve on the board? And the answer is yes, the CEO can serve on the board. That's up to a ministry to determine if that's appropriate or not. But it just, they would be considered non-independent. So they still have to have an independent board who meets at least twice a year. If you're a church and you're listening in, you're like, well, that's twice a year. Like, that's not very often. Churches usually meet more likely maybe once a month. But for a lot of nonprofit ministries with boards that are spread out through the US, it's 2 to 3 meetings a year for a lot of them. And then standards 3, 4, and 5 really are kind of the financial standards. That's financial oversight. So that requires all organizations to engage with an independent CPA and for the board to have adequate relationship there. That was unique back in the 70s. That was one of the big deals that came out of the standards, is that ECFA required all member organizations to have an audit, an independent CPA audit. That's more normal now than it was 45 years ago. We've made some changes over time. We have a threshold statement that allows organizations maybe not have to engage in a full audit just because of the cost, but and then we have use of resources, a standard 4, use of resources and compliance with laws. That's really around the idea of, are you using resources to further your exempt purpose? Both restricted, unrestricted, all of those pieces. There's a lot of other things that go in there, but that's a very simple way to say it. Standard 5 is transparency. We'll probably jump into transparency a little bit later, but ECFA does require all members to release their financial statements to individuals upon request. So if an individual asks, if you're listening and you're an ECFA member, if someone asks, you need to provide your financial statements. There's a few exceptions to that, but for the most part, organizations need to provide those in a reasonable time. And then standard 6 is really tightly connected to governance. It's around this idea of setting compensation and entering into related party transactions. So we have a whole policy of what's required in that area. And then standard 7, we say we have 7 standards. We do have 7 standards, but standard 7 is really like 5 standards. But we still say 7. So we have 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, which is all around the idea of fundraising, truthfulness in fundraising, honoring giver intent, acting in giver's best interest, how you compensate your fundraisers. So that's kind of the 7 standards. I don't want to belabor that too much, but Jeff, if you want me to dig into any deeper, I'm happy to.
Well, I'm going to come back to the leadership standard in a minute, but now talk about accreditation. What is that and why is that important?
Yeah. Well, accreditation really is a way for organizations to show that they're operating with integrity, that they have committed to operating within the 7 standards that ECFA has. And I would say we would say like there's a difference between accrediting and rating, right? Like there's a lot of we get that question a lot, is like, how does ECFA differ from like a rating organization, or how does ECFA rate this specific organization? And as an accreditor, we accredit. We don't rate an organization. So when an organization is accredited by ECFA, they're listed on our website, and it means that they meet all 7 standards. It's a pass or fail concept. You need to be with all the standards, not just a few of them. Can't meet 4 of the 7.
And it's not subjective, right? Like this is all measurable, independently validated compliance, essentially.
It is, yeah. I mean, we have a team of CPAs and professionals that walk through on a yearly basis every ministry's renewal, financial statements, all those pieces. But so rating organizations, I mean, they rate on a lot of different factors, right? And that tends to be a little different. But with accreditation comes a seal similar to a rating organization, the ECFA seal, which shows donors and shows the public like, hey, we are being held accountable by a third-party organization that is that's staffed and that is actually reviewing everything every year as it relates to the standards. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it really helps an organization show their donors that they have an accountability partner. We also, I think, while it shows that organizations are operating with integrity, we'd be careful to say like integrity is not perfection. Accreditation is not perfection. Organizations can't be perfect. And ECFA has a redemptive approach to working with those ministries whenever maybe there's a standard issue, and we can come back to that later. But I think, yeah, I don't know. Does that answer that question, Jeff, well enough?
Yeah. And so I think if a pastor in particular or a ministry leader is listening and they're thinking, well, do I qualify? Can I be accredited? What's the value? Well, the value is that an independent organization, sometimes we think of it, like I could ask you, hey, what's the best pizza place in Winchester, Virginia, right? And if the local pizza place said, hey, we've got the best pizza in town, you're going to hold that information a little more loosely than maybe if a food rater that's more objective and independent, right, might say, hey, let me tell you about the top 5 pizza places in Winchester, Virginia. And I know that's an oversimplification, but I'm trying to illustrate the point of that independent nature of accreditation to say, hey, this organization has demonstrated through an independent validation process that they are compliant. And that says a lot about trust through transparency for donors, board members, leaders, frankly, employees, whoever the congregation or constituency might be. They can all have the assurance that another organization is monitoring, if you will, or validating compliance. Would you agree with what I said there?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you tied it back to trust. I mean, that's absolutely correct. And I would also say, if you're ever in Winchester, I have 2 teenage boys that would be happy to validate the 5 best pizza places in Winchester.
Sign me up. I've got a couple of trips to Northern Virginia, so I'll be coming in. You can text me. So this is really helpful. And what I appreciated about the standards there, similar to ECAP child safety standards, is you really started with good, our legal counsel, Sally Wagenmaker, who John Van Drunen, I was just with him, by the way, former EVP for ECFA. I was with him recently. He came to a child protection training event that we hosted in Northern Virginia with Rob Showers. And he introduced us to Sally Wagenmaker, who is our legal counsel to this day. And she always talks about good and godly governance. And this is really this idea of internal controls and checks and balances that are happening within an organization. So that at a church level, that might be a deacon board, elder board, trustee board, board of directors for a nonprofit, right? And that group of individuals ultimately has stewardship to hold in trust to the mission, to the financial stewardship, to the management and leadership of the human resources, all that's entailed for that organization. And I think that's really, really important. Is there anything more that you might say about a board governance there as it relates to trust?
Yeah, well, I mean, the board really is the organization that provides that. It's not the organization, but the group that provides that ability for trust to be enhanced in a ministry. I think back through different compliance items that we've worked through. I mean, one of the biggest things that we want to see is board minutes. Like, we want to understand how the board operates, what's being discussed, where is their mower blade set, right? When it comes to governance, we don't, the board doesn't need to be in the dirt, in the weeds of everything, but they do need to be at the right level. And when an organization encounters failure, it almost always ties back to a breakdown of governance, that there was a breakdown at some point in accountability or just over effective governance. So taking the steps to orient board to select board members, like, don't take that too lightly, right? I mean, if organizations, like, pick your board members wisely, have a thorough process that they're being kind of interviewed and then going through a whole orientation to make sure that they will be a good fit. And also through that orientation, it ensures that they're up for the responsibilities of what it means to be a board member. I mean, I've served on several church boards and other ministry boards, and there is a balance of just those individuals that just kind of like get put on the board but really don't know what to expect. So then when it gets hard, it's easy for them to jump off because like, well, I didn't sign up for that. But making it very clear of what they actually are signing up for when they become a board member. It's not just a seat. It's not just we get to sit back and watch the pastor or CEO do the work. There's work to be done as a board. And so that really is critical to have the right process in place.
I want to just highlight this for a minute because I think this is so very important. And a healthy board, an engaged board is really, really important for all ministries. And so I'm just going to pause here and step up on the soapbox to say, because like you, I've served on a number of boards, and it's easy to just show up every once in a while for a meeting. And so I'll never forget, I'm going to look it up and I'm going to put it onto the screen for the recording. But Valerie Bell, the previous CEO of Awana, had a great line of or list of challenges for board members. And I want to share that because I think an engaged board is really, really important. So you talk about the selection process for board members, having some sort of maybe orientation, board development plan. The board really needs to be holding itself accountable. It should not be thinking that the first chair, the chief executive, is holding the board accountable. That's backwards. Right. The first chair, if you will, the chief executive, reports to the board, oftentimes as the sole employee of the board. And so following your bylaws, okay, let's back up. Having bylaws, having a statement of faith, following your bylaws, reviewing them from time to time, taking minutes, having officers, a chair or board president, secretary, treasurer, these types of roles is really the board governance 101, right? Meeting on a regular basis, if you're not sure, meet quarterly at a minimum. I like how you said at least twice a year, which is great. But then look for ways as a board member to advance the mission in between board meetings. Check in with the chief executive. How can I pray for you? How can I support you? Give to support the ministry that you're on the board of. These are basics. And then moving from the basics into the accountability piece, which I think is what you're encouraging us all to do, is ask questions about the ministry, actually review the financials, approve the budget. Be aware of the ministry's growth or decline or whatever it might be. Listen and support the chief executive when you serve on the board. Anything more that you would add? I just felt like I had to do just a quick, board governance 101 here. What would you add to that?
Yeah, I think I hope I don't butcher this too bad. I'm jogging my memory here, but in one of our resources, we talk about that a board member really wears 3 hats. They have the governance hat, the volunteer hat, and I think the participant hat. And you can only wear 1 hat at a time. So I love what you said, Jeff. Like, there's that time when they need to come engaged with their governance hat on. But as a board member, especially if you're in a local church, you're also going to come with a volunteer hat on that you're no longer a board member, you're now a volunteer, right? So you went from leading at the board level to now you're a volunteer, and you're following the direction potentially of a staff member at the church. And then later you're even a participant. So then you're like even the next level down, and you can't put all your different hats on at one time, but board members are required to wear those three hats, no matter what. They need to participate in all those different areas. So I think it's important that we remember that too, is when you're volunteering, you're not volunteering as a board member. You're volunteering as a volunteer, just like anybody else that's there volunteering. That you don't serve a different role. And for board members to be able to do that with humility takes work. It's a decision that they need to make.
I found that list of resolutions for nonprofit boards, and then 6 expectations that I'll be sure to post. So that's really helpful. And by the way, I've got a stack of resources from ECFA. We've even posted some, one in particular by Dr. Bird, excuse me, on board governance on the ECAP website. And so we'll be sure to share more of those resources. But if you're curious, what does a healthy board look like? Be sure to check out some of the great resources from ECFA. Jake, I think this is a great segue into the new leadership standard. And so I want to just make a quick reference. This will be brief because we did a whole webinar on this topic, but really ECFA has recognized the importance of leadership in healthy organizations and in transparency and good governance. Could you just tell us briefly about the new leadership standard and how that fits into what you all do?
Yeah. So the new leadership standard, really the whole concept around it is to require boards to provide proactive care for their senior leader. And a big question is, why only the senior leader? Why not more? And ECFA historically has always focused on boards and senior leaders. It's up to the senior leader reports, like you said earlier. That usually reports to the board chair. That's their only employee as a board, is usually the senior leader. And so after significant, about 3 years of research and discernment, and ECFA had a task force that worked through all of this, in early March, we released a draft standard all around that. It comes with the way the standard is written. The draft standard is written today is 3 requirements, really. I mean, it talks about the importance of leader care, but it's that the board annually meets with the CEO to engage in a conversation around soul care, around care for the leader, and that it be documented in the board minutes. But our hope is that it seems very simple to just 1 meeting a year, document the board minutes, we're good to go. But our hope is that it starts a conversation. So much research has been done. We did research several months ago, actually at the beginning of the process, and found that 94% of senior leaders and board chairs, we had about 800 respond, believe that integrity failures are having a significant impact on trust. Earlier this year, there was a report from Barna said 4 out of 5 donors believe that if organizations would provide proactive care, that it would enhance trust in that organization. And as a trust organization, we believe that leader health is critical to an organization thriving. And yeah, I mean, a simple question is, how does that relate to financial, right? Financial is in your name, and those pieces. Well, ECFA, again, like I said, that we've been beyond financial from the beginning. But I think it's important to say that the biggest financial risk to an organization is the failure of a top leader. We've seen it happen. I mean, you don't have to look far in the news to see the impact of organizations. I mean, some organizations just pretty much cease to exist after this type of scenario. And the standard is not about. We don't believe that it's going to stop moral failure from happening or integrity failures. We can't do that, and we acknowledge that. However, we do hope that this type of conversation will help maybe curb something, right? Curb that before maybe it leads to a significant failure, or just all the research that we see of pastors and leaders burning out. Leaders are isolated, they carry a heavy burden. And I mean, I think about like the giving and inflation and all those things. Like, leaders carry that weight on their shoulders, and the board needs to step up, and the board needs to be providing some care, and the senior leader needs to be able to be vulnerable to the board as well, in that scenario. And I think that's a big piece of it, is how does that relationship work? And ECFA is still working on resources and things around that. But our goal is that the standard opens up this level of communication where, I say, is leaders can go from surviving to thriving. And because we don't just want leaders to survive. Ministries don't move in the right directions when a leader's just surviving.
It's so good. And I didn't for a second think that the leadership standard and financial accountability were disconnected. Like, that's 100% in my mind connected. Frankly, for similar to our world, where leadership and child protection actually go hand in hand. And I think this is a really, really important time for ECFA to provide this kind of leadership, to proactively, like, this is what I see ECFA doing, is prompting boards across the country, even around the world, to say, you know what, we need to stop and make sure that our chief executive is healthy, starting with good and godly character, right? That qualification to be the leader that God's called them to be. The vulnerability that you talk about is so very important. I think it's easy for a board to look at the easy data. Are we growing, right? Are we seeing numbers increasing? Are we seeing, revenue coming in? Are we meeting our expenses? These kind of easy, if you will, or more easily measured data. But here's something in leadership health that's a little less quantitative, right? It's a little bit more touchy-feely, but it's so very important that the leader is healthy and sustainable, if I can use that word, sustainable, because even if you try to put a price tag on leadership transition, it's actually very, very expensive for an organization. So to proactively make sure that the leader is ready and able to continue to serve and advance the mission is so important. Why would we not do that? Frankly, as a matter of biblical stewardship, why would we not do that? Because so many of our Christian ministries have such important missions to accomplish, whether that's, proclaiming the gospel, evangelism, or discipleship, or mercy ministry, or whatever it might be. That work is so important. We need to make sure that our leaders are ready to continue to carry that out long into the future.
Yeah.
And
it
I
has
believe
to
we'll
be
stand
done.
before God and give an account for it, right?
Yeah. And I think the fine line there is it has to be done in the right way. And I think we know what that way is, right? It has to be done in love for that leader. I mean, go touchy-feely on you, but it really does go back to love. We're called to love as Christians, and that conversation can, the board has to create an environment where the leader feels comfortable and doesn't feel like they're going to be shamed or just judged. And the board needs to enter those conversations with empathy as well. And I think some of the challenges is, we've had the opportunity to talk to a lot, and I mean, I wish I could share. We're close to releasing some of what we heard through our 90-day feedback, and I wish I could share publicly. I can't yet, though. It's not quite ready. But what I want to make clear is the empathy piece. And I think one of the struggles for organizations, and this probably more just me as I've been processing through phone calls and different things, is you have people serving on your board that also may be leaders of nonprofit ministries or churches that are on your board, and they may not be getting that care from their board, so therefore they're not quite understanding why they should give you that care either. So it's kind of like this trickle effect, and it's like, well, if I do that for you, but I want someone to do that for me. I mean, I was talking with a leader just earlier today, and she's like, I do a ton to care for my staff, but no one's caring for me. And it's like, at what point at what point, you kind of need to serve out of that overflow. Like the board needs to be filling the leader, and they can then fill their staff. And at what point does it get to be too much? Or like, man, I'm not getting cared for. I can't continue to just pour out and pour out if no one's pouring into me. So I think a board, they're going to have to be flexible, and they are going to have to enter it into with empathy and with understanding of the unique burdens. And it's not going to be the same for every organization. I mean, you have leaders that have an empty house, no kids in the home. That care for them is going to look different than a CEO that has multiple kids, young kids at home, and is caring for their family. I mean, travel looks different. All of those pieces look different, and the board needs to be proactive in identifying care for that specific leader. The danger will be when there's a leader transition. Do they just keep repeating? But what if that repeating doesn't work? It's not care for the next leader. I mean, it really is almost a customized approach. And that's why ECFA wasn't prescriptive in the standard to provide a bunch of like, here's the 5 things, because it's different for every single leader.
Yeah, that's good. And so being aware of the context, I was just thinking, even there for a moment, the heavy travel schedule of some organizational leaders having to travel all over the country and being away from their family. And I mean, if you just think about it, honestly, the first chair leadership is kind of a recipe for disaster. I mean, I'm just speaking candidly here that, if you're traveling and you've got this kind of responsibility and a team that you're leading and a budget that you're responsible for, and the board only checks in a few times a year, you've got such great autonomy. Honestly, I just know the human heart, right? We're all Christians, so let's just be honest about the human condition, right? We live in a Genesis 3 world. And so our theology here needs to match and say, hey, we need accountability. We need those check-ins. We need to make sure that we're abiding in Christ, right? It's a John 15. And I really appreciate that you mentioned love. I have to quickly give a clarification that, of course, the love we're talking about here is 1 Corinthians 13, agape love, right? That's selfless, sacrificial, others focused, unconditional. And that is the opposite of the world's love, right? The world's love says, I love you because of the way you make me feel and what you do for me, right? Totally opposite than Christ's love. But what a beautiful picture of the gospel lived out in a board context with the senior leader. That's what you're calling us to do. And I just think that's a beautiful thing. All Christian ministries need to hear this and heed this admonition from ECFA to make sure that their leaders are in a healthy spot to keep leading.
Yeah, and the leader too, Jeff, just add on to that. The leader has to be prepped to accept it. They have the responsibility to arrive into that conversation with humility and accept the care that's being provided to them. And I think that will be a challenge as well in a situation where that leader feels like they are carrying the weight of it and no one else is carrying it with them, and they're gonna have to accept it. I mean, I'm not the top leader here at ECFA. That's Michael Martin. But I know just from a personal level, whenever we welcomed our daughter in December to our family, I took off, and I haven't really traveled that much this year, and I've had to let go of some things, and I've had to allow others to step in and fill some gaps, and that's extremely difficult. But at the same time, like, it's the right thing to do. And it wasn't easy for me to accept it in my position. And I can only imagine it'd be even harder for someone in that top seat to accept that level of like, you know what, I am going to step away for a little while, or I am going to take some time off, and I'm going to rely on my staff to pick up the pieces.
Well, leadership development might be the topic of a future webinar in the future, because we got to keep that pipeline going, right? To make sure that the next person to fill those Christian ministries is there, is qualified, is competent, and all the rest. Well, let's talk more about accreditation as an ongoing membership with ECFA. Obviously, you provide a number of resources for members in this space related to leadership and financial accountability and board governance and all the rest. What does that look like? What are some ways that you resource ECFA members beyond accreditation, or maybe to maintain accreditation?
Yeah, well, I'd say it's really 2 different things. One is the accountability. So we have a member accountability team made up mostly of CPAs on our team. And then we have the communication side as well, which is made up of a ton of talented people that focus really into that point of communication, communicating the message, marketing, all of those pieces. We have a great team on both sides. So from a communication standpoint, let's talk about that first. And accountability is we have to provide education around what it means to be accountable organization, specifically to the standards. And so our communications team really focuses in on that piece. We have an individual on our team that's that spends time on Capitol Hill, speaking with different people, working through some of those things, all that brings, writing resources, and all of those things. And our communications team then makes those available and communicates out with our members. And a lot of that is driven from the accountability side of what we're seeing in members. So our accountability, first, there's kind of 4 different steps. This one is the application. You have to apply to become a member, just like you would for ECAP. So you have to walk through an application process, and when an organization enters into that process, they get assigned a coach to walk them through. Applications can take significant time depending on the needs. And if you're listening and you're like, I'm not sure if we're even ready yet, we do have tools out there on our join page that will help you walk through that process. But you're always welcome to apply, and our team will walk you through and coach you, provide resources along the way in order to help you get to that point. Once you're accredited, once our board has walked through and approved accreditation for members, it turns into an annual process. So there's an annual accreditation renewal process that organizations go through, where they fill out forms, they confirm compliance with the standards, provide financial statements, 990s if it's applicable, and all of those fun things that CPAs love to look at. And so on a yearly basis, those are submitted. Our team goes through each one individually and reaches out if we have additional questions, or if members not in compliance, and we work with them to come back into compliance. So that's kind of our renewal process. And then we have the standards check-in, which isn't a yearly process. We're trying to get it to be around every 7 years. And that whole piece is a deep dive. During the renewal, it's confirming compliance. During the standards check-in, it's verifying compliance. So that's when we're requesting documentation, all of those pieces that we dig deeper. That can happen virtually or on site. We kind of decide based on the member. And then we have our compliance review side. And people have the option. People can actually send in, I don't know if, and maybe not everyone knows that, people can share a concern with ECFA. Like, hey, I have a concern about a ministry and their compliance with the standards. I'm the lucky one that gets all those emails. So that's a big part of my role, is working with members who have an open compliance issue. And if there is a standard concern, if we look into it and we're like, there probably is a potential standard violation, then ECFA may put that member under review for a season. During the review, the member is still an active member of ECFA. However, we do have and through our redemptive approach to compliance, like if the member is willing to continue to work towards compliance, and we walk with them through that process, as long as it's reasonable and happens in a reasonable amount of time. So we walk through that process. We have members under review from time to time, and then after that, like if there's significant violations, then our board may get involved at that point and require suspension or even termination of a member. But that's kind of the accreditation. But we learn a lot through that process. So like, especially during the standards check-in, we've seen some things maybe around, like in the last couple of years, around fundraising that members that we're working with members on. And so that triggers us to be like, we probably need to work on fundraising resources and updating some fundraising resources, publishing some new resources. We just published an ebook on fundraising and some of those pieces. So a lot of what we do on the accountability team drives what we do for webinars, what we do for resources, ebooks, all of those pieces. So kind of all flows seamlessly through the team.
Obviously, you represent membership, 2,700 or so members that you have across the country, and you can speak and resource and advocate on their behalf. Can you talk a little bit more about monitoring kind of the industry, and what trends and things do you see taking place? I think you hinted there for a moment, maybe about just donor development, but how do you monitor the financial industry of the nonprofit space? What does that look like, and how do you communicate to your members about those trends?
Yeah. I mean, the best way to get we communicate mostly through our pulse email that goes out, I believe weekly. I should know that. I'm sorry. But I think it happens weekly. Like I get it every week. And so that's the best way that we communicate, is through that. We also have just our news on there. But like I said, we do have one of my coworkers, Aaron Mercer, who's a senior strategist here at ECFA. He focuses really in on tracking what's happening on Capitol Hill, what's just kind of happening. He keeps a pulse on what's happening in the evangelical world. And so through that, I mean, I can chat a little bit about like what we're tracking right now, some of the things. I mean, this is one of the newest things that just came just last week is, they don't all relate to finance, but they do relate to members. So we do track those. Just last week, the National Religious Broadcasters filed the week of August 31st, filed a lawsuit against the IRS around the Johnson Amendment, the ability for organizations to speak relating to political items. So that just happened, and it'll be interesting to see how that kind of makes its way through the system. Johnson Amendment's been challenged many times over the years, but has not been successful. And then, some big financial things that are affecting ministries is the employee retention credit. And I know that probably a lot of people are like, that's old, we don't need to worry about that anymore. The recent article said this is the biggest tax fraud scandal of all time. And I know most of us are like, what do you mean? Like, a lot of organizations filed for it and received it legitimately, but there were what we'd consider kind of ERC mills out there that were calling and just trying to get you to file, and they take a portion of your funds and all those pieces. And the IRS kind of like has been very involved and very pretty much like stopped processing claims for a while. And so a lot of organizations that are ECFA members got this credit. And so we're encouraging them to make sure that it was legitimate. And if there's concern, there is a open voluntary disclosure program that's open right now for organizations to kind of, you return 85% of the funds. There's no penalties and interest in those pieces through November. So if you're concerned, it'd be important. The other thing is, it's impacting a lot of organizations, is the Fair Labor Standards change that happened July 1st, where the impacted overtime rules and exempt employees. And the first deadline is passed. So if you have an exempt employee, that means they don't get overtime. They need to be making at least, I have it written down, $43,888. And on January 1st, that amount goes to $58,656, which is a significant jump. So just put that in perspective. I think it was $35,644. Don't quote me on the number, but it was close to that before. So it jumped $8,000 July 1st. Now it's jumping another $15,000 on January 1st. So organizations are scrambling for that, and saying, what do we do? We're going to have to start paying people overtime, which is significant. And so just be tracking that. It is being challenged in the court system. It's being challenged in the same district that overturned it in 2000, I think it was 18, the last time it was challenged. But the fact that they got through the first step is important to note. And so those are kind of two big things. There's a lot of charitable giving things out there. I mean, there's the Charitable Giving Act. There's that's out there that's around the incentives to give. During the pandemic, we had the $300, $600 above the line adjustment for charitable giving. So people that even got a standard deduction can take a deduction, trying to bring that back at different levels. But the other thing to keep an eye on too for organizations is the fact that depending on the results of the election, we could have significant tax changes at the end of 2025 that come into play. And if things sunset back like they're scheduled right now, that will also return the standard deduction back to the 2018 levels, inflation adjusted, which could actually potentially have a increase in giving. And a conference I was at recently with Mike Batts, he shared a recent report from the National Bureau of Economic Research that there was an estimated $20 billion decrease in giving because of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, because it no longer allowed people to take that itemized deduction, so they maybe decrease their giving. So a lot of things to keep track of there. I don't want to take all the rest of our time. I probably could just keep talking about it, but
what about cryptocurrency? How does that play into people being able to give money through these different types of cryptocurrency? Do you address or monitor that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if there's any new regulations out there around crypto. I mean, if an organization is listening, it's a great thing to walk through a process of accepting crypto. I mean, there's some good organizations that will help you accept crypto. The biggest thing there is for donors that want to make significant donations to your ministry, and they may hold crypto, that donating crypto is very tax advantageous for those individuals, because they would eliminate the capital gains tax, which is pretty significant. So imagine you bought crypto when it was $1, and now it's whatever thousands of dollars it is. It's a lot of taxes when you come to actually liquidate that. So by giving it, it allows someone to give without the tax impact of liquidating it.
Well, Jake, it's fascinating. I can imagine just monitoring finance and nonprofit with churches and all the rest. You had glanced quickly over the 990, but I know that's a big deal for faith-based organizations, whether to report or not to report, and whether they have to claim exemption with the 990. But ECFA is really providing such great leadership and expertise in this space. And so if a pastor or ministry leader is just wondering, like, what in the world do I do? ECFA is a tremendous resource to get answers to some of these questions related to finance in the nonprofit world. So Jake, tell us more. Where can one go to learn more about ECFA? Where would you get started if you're interested in membership with ECFA?
Yeah, the best place to go would just be our website, ecfa.org. There's a join section to the website. There's also a resource section. Some of the resources are available at no cost as well. So you just usually have to just create an account. It's free to create an account. By creating an account too, you sign up to get the Pulse weekly email, which is probably the best way to just kind of stay up to date on some trends. It's not always government trends. Sometimes it's just trends and resources or trends that we're seeing that are out there. And if organizations want to start that process of joining, then they can go to the join page, and we have a chat function. You can chat with our staff right there on the web page, or go ahead and engage through an application. But that's probably the best way to engage. I would encourage, we have as we approach the end of the year, I know this wasn't just this little session here wasn't about giving, but giving is on everyone's minds, and the impact of giving. At the end in November, Dr. Warren Bird and I will do our annual State of Giving. So him and I co-author that report every year, and we look back and we look forward as well. We look at financial outlook. So if you're already a member of the Pulse, you got an email today launching the financial outlook survey today, 9/5/2024, and we'll be releasing those results, and that's usually a webinar that's free to everyone. We make that publicly available to anyone to listen, not just ECFA members, but it's going to be an interesting one. We're going to have a lot of information to share. We've run some preliminary data and things, but yeah, our website really is the best place to go.
And just to clarify, to get the Pulse, you don't have to be a member. Anybody can sign up to receive the Pulse.
Anybody can. Yep.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, so one last question. This is great. So learn more at ecfa.org. What's maybe one or two things that churches and/or nonprofits often overlook when it comes to financial accountability? Like what, leave us with something that maybe we should go consider if maybe I'm the leader of a nonprofit, the pastor of a local church, sitting on the board of some organization. What are some common things that you see from your vantage point at ECFA that maybe just someone hearing this says, you know what, I need to go look into that?
Yeah. Ooh, that's a tough one, Jeff. Man. Um,
I didn't mean to stump you there.
you didn't stump me. I'm trying to see what's most important.
There's so
I
many.
Yeah, there really is. I think one I would say is going back to governance. I would encourage all organizations to go back and just look at your board minutes. The board minutes need to be documented at the right level. And so if your board minutes look like an agenda, that's probably not enough. If your board minutes are a novel, that's probably too much. But finding that right level of documentation that you can go back and see the historical reason why decisions were made is critically important. It's also important because I mean, just if the IRS was ever to come, and hopefully they never do, that is one of the first places they look for things, because that shows so much. That's what we look at as well. So I would go back and look at board minutes, make sure things are documented, make sure that motions are documented and approved and all of those pieces, and that's actually documented in the board minutes. So much of ECFA standards relies on, we look for approvals in the board minutes, and it's important that those are there. The other thing too, I would just say is donors are more aware today than they ever have been. There's more ways for them to research. There's more ways for them to get data. So make sure that your fundraising communications are truthful. Make sure that they speak clearly, that you're not stretching anything. You're using photos that are accurate, that actually show the ministry, just simple things like that. Just make sure that that's happening, because donors, that's an element of transparency that donors want to see. They want you to be honest, and they can see through things. I mean, it's no longer. I think historically, when you kind of had like, I've given to this organization and I just always will, versus I've given to this organization and they haven't really shown that they've used the money for the intended purpose, so I'm no longer going to give to them. And so you have that element of people want to see their money at work. They want to see updates. They want to know how the money's being spent. That's just how it works now. And so that transparency is key. When it comes to transparency, one thing I didn't mention earlier is I would encourage ministries, and I wrote this down so I'd say it right, to look at, instead of an organization asking a question of like what information should be made public, which kind of is an element of secrecy, like what should be, is flipping that and saying what information should be confidential. And so being more open to answering questions, to providing financial statements, to providing information around fundraising projects, those things, it will enhance trust with donors and the public.
That's really good. And frankly, some of those are just good fundraising development tactics, so you're talking about transparency and just being open and honest, right? Which is radical for Christians. Just kidding. Sorry. Right. That's what Christ has called us to do, is to live a life of integrity and character, right? God looks to the heart, not just what man looks at, which is the exterior, right? But God looks at the heart. But you're calling that sort of integrity and transparency to Christian ministries. I would argue that's actually a good best practice in fundraising as well, that you're that a great way to lose a donor, in other words, right, is to not be truthful, as radical as that sounds. Well, I want to leave our audience with 6 expectations for board leadership, just because so much of what we've talked about today here centers around the board and good and godly board governance. Number 1, give to support the work. If you're on the board, this is for you. Give to support the work that you're a part of. Number 2, connect your network to the ministry. Number 3, invite others to financially support and to pray for that work. Number 4, advocate for the ministry and the mission on the behalf of the leadership. Just because you're on the board and you might have full-time staff doing the work of the ministry doesn't make you exempt from that sort of advocacy and advancement. Number 5, express gratitude for the work to donors, to team members, and all the rest. And number 6, participate actively in all of the meetings. So show up and be engaged, participate. So those are 6 basic expectations for board leadership if you are listening here and perhaps serve on a board. Today, my guest has been on Meet the Experts, Jake Lapp. Jake is with the Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability. My name is Jeff Dalrymple, Executive Director of ECAP, Evangelical Council for Abuse Prevention. So a lot of acronyms happening here today, but the goal with both of our ministry is trust and transparency, that we would, as leaders and as Christians, stand before the Lord one day and give an account for what's been entrusted to us. We use this term stewardship so frequently, and it means not ownership, but means something's been entrusted to you. And it could be financial, it could be a mission, it could be human resources that you've been entrusted with. And so, friend, we would just challenge you to take the stewardship of those resources seriously and to foster trust and transparency in your Christian ministry, that the Lord would be glorified, that the Lord would come back and find you faithful to the mission and to the calling for which he's called you to do. It's so very important. And so thank you for ECFA to be a part. I hope that you'll also learn more about ECAP at ecap.net. We're a national association of Christian ministries committed to child and youth protection. And we too call for greater transparency and accountability through our various Christian ministries, whether it's a church, a school, a camp, any child and youth serving organization. We believe that child protection starts with good and godly governance, and would challenge you to excel still more. Well, Jake, thank you so much for being on the program with us today. Grateful for you and our dear friends at ECFA. I hope that you'll pass along warm regards to Michael and all of the team there. Thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff.